My name is Lena Parker. I am 33 years old, and I have been married to my husband Ryan for 8 years. Last weekend, we were celebrating our wedding anniversary with family and friends when, in the middle of the party, my sister-in-law suddenly stood up and accused me of having an affair. She even showed everyone messages that looked like proof. Within seconds, the entire room turned against me. People started whispering, and my husband looked hurt and confused. But instead of arguing, I simply smiled. Because a minute later, I connected my phone to the TV, and what everyone saw on that screen changed everything. But before I tell you what actually happened, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me what country you're watching from in the comments. Now let me tell you about the night that changed how my husband's family looked at me forever. Our house was full of people that evening. Soft music was playing in the living room, and the dining table was covered with food, drinks, and a large cake with golden candles on top. It was supposed to be a happy night. My husband Ryan and I were celebrating our 8th wedding anniversary. Friends were laughing, glasses were clinking, and someone was telling a funny story near the kitchen. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But I could already feel something was wrong, because across the room Ryan's younger sister Claire kept staring at me, not in a normal way, but in that quiet, smug way she always did when she thought she knew something I didn't. Claire and I had never been close. From the day Ryan first introduced me to his family, she made it clear she didn't like me. At first, she hid it behind polite smiles, but over the years those smiles slowly turned into small comments, little jokes, and whispers when she thought I couldn't hear. "You're lucky Ryan takes care of you. You must enjoy living such an easy life. You married very well." The kind of words that sound harmless to others but carry sharp edges underneath. For years I ignored it and told myself it wasn't worth fighting over, but that night something about Claire felt different. She looked confident, like she had been waiting for this moment. I noticed she kept whispering to a few relatives. Every now and then someone would glance at me and then quickly look away. My stomach tightened. Ryan noticed my expression and asked quietly if I was okay. I forced a smile and told him I was just tired, but the truth was I had a feeling the night was about to go very wrong. About an hour later, everyone gathered in the living room because it was time to cut the anniversary cake. Someone dimmed the lights, and Ryan stood beside me with his arm around my shoulder. 8 years, he said with a grin. Can you believe it? I laughed softly and said sometimes I couldn't. People clapped, and several guests lifted their phones to record the moment. But before we could cut the cake, a voice suddenly spoke from behind us. Actually, before we celebrate, the room slowly turned toward the sound. It was Claire. She was standing near the dining table holding her phone, and she was smiling, not a happy smile, but a cold one. Ryan frowned and asked what she was doing. She stepped forward slowly and said she thought everyone deserved to know something first. The room became quiet, and a few guests exchanged confused looks. Ryan sighed and told her it wasn't the time, but she interrupted him. Then she turned toward the guests and said she hadn't wanted to do this tonight, but her brother deserved the truth. My heart started beating faster because I knew exactly where this was going. Claire lifted her phone and said, "And the truth is," then she looked directly at me. "Your perfect wife has been having an affair." The room exploded into whispers. People looked at each other in disbelief. Some asked if they had heard correctly. Ryan's arm slowly slipped from my shoulder as he stared at Claire in shock and asked what she was talking about. Claire walked closer and said she had proof. She turned the screen so everyone could see. Messages. Photos. A conversation between me and another man. The messages looked intimate, private, and damaging. The whispers around the room grew louder. Some people looked at me with disbelief. Others looked angry. Ryan's face turned pale as he looked at the phone and then at me. "Lena," he said quietly. For a moment, the entire room felt like it was spinning. Claire watched my face carefully, waiting and hoping I would panic, cry, or start defending myself. But instead I slowly took a deep breath, and then I smiled. Claire blinked. She clearly didn't expect that reaction. "Why are you smiling?" she asked sharply. I looked at her calmly, then at the guests, then at Ryan, and finally back at Claire. The truth was, those messages didn't scare me at all. Because a week earlier, I had already discovered something very interesting, and Claire had no idea. I gently set the cake knife down on the table. Then I looked at the large television mounted on the wall in our living room and said something that made Claire's confident smile disappear. "Since you brought your phone," I said calmly, "why don't we connect it to the TV?" The room fell silent. Claire frowned. "What?" I kept smiling. "So, Everyone can see the evidence clearly. And for the first time that night, Claire looked a little nervous. The room had gone completely quiet, and everyone was watching us. Ryan looked between me and his sister, clearly unsure what was happening. Claire tried to laugh it off and quickly said, "Why would I do that? Everyone can already see the messages." I shrugged lightly and replied, "True, but the screen is small. If we connect it to the TV, everyone can see them properly." A few guests nodded, and someone even said it made sense. Claire's smile returned, but it looked forced now. "Fine," she said. "If that's what you want." She walked toward the television and handed her phone to Ryan. "Here, you connect it." Ryan hesitated for a moment, then plugged the phone into the cable near the TV. A second later, Claire's screen appeared on the large television, and the same messages were now displayed for everyone in the room to see. Whispers spread again as people stared at the screen. "Wow, those messages look real," someone murmured. Ryan stared at the screen in silence for a moment before slowly turning toward me. "Lena, you need to explain this." I nodded calmly. "I will," I said, then looked at Claire. "But first, let's make sure everyone sees everything." Claire crossed her arms confidently and told me to go ahead and explain my affair. But instead of touching her phone or the screen, I stayed exactly where I was and smiled again. Claire's eyes narrowed immediately. She asked if I thought this was funny, and I softly replied that I didn't. I just thought this moment had been coming for a long time. A few people in the room looked confused, and Ryan frowned slightly as he asked what I meant. I glanced around the room at the guests, at Ryan's parents, and finally at Claire before speaking slowly. I explained that Claire had never liked me. She rolled her eyes right away and said, "Oh, please," but I continued anyway. From the day Ryan first introduced me to his family, she had made it clear that she thought I didn't belong. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, and Ryan's mother adjusted in her seat. Claire laughed coldly and accused me of playing the victim, but I ignored her. For years, I continued calmly. Claire has made small comments about me, about how I wasn't good enough for Ryan, and how I didn't deserve the life I had. Ryan turned toward his sister and asked if that was true. Claire dismissed it with a wave of her hand and said, "Everyone jokes," but I shook my head and explained that they were never jokes. Claire's expression hardened, and she snapped back, asking if I thought that meant she had created fake messages. The guests started whispering again while Ryan rubbed his forehead and muttered that the situation was getting out of control. But I wasn't finished. "You see," I continued calmly, "something interesting happened last week." Claire's shoulders stiffened slightly when I said that. I explained that I had received a strange notification on my phone, a security alert saying someone had tried to log into my accounts from another device. A few guests looked surprised, but Claire quickly interrupted, saying people receive alerts like that all the time and that it didn't mean anything. I nodded slowly and agreed that most of the time it didn't. The room stayed quiet as everyone listened carefully. Then I added that this time the alert also showed the location of the device. Claire's fingers tightened slightly around her phone, and Ryan immediately noticed the movement. He looked at her and slowly said her name. Claire forced a laugh and sarcastically asked if I was now accusing her of hacking my phone. Instead of answering her directly, I walked slowly toward the television. The messages, the fake conversation, and the supposed affair were still displayed on the screen. I turned back toward the guests and explained that when I saw that alert, I decided to look a little deeper. Claire suddenly looked tense, and the confidence she had earlier was beginning to crack. Ryan noticed it too, and looked between us again before asking quietly what I was trying to say. I took a slow breath and looked directly at Claire. "I'm saying those messages didn't surprise me." For a moment Claire's face went pale, but she quickly snapped back and insisted that they were real. I shook my head calmly. The room felt completely frozen. Ryan stared at me and asked what they were if they weren't real. I smiled again and said they were something very interesting. Claire suddenly stepped forward and told Ryan not to listen to me because I was trying to confuse everyone. But Ryan didn't move. He was staring at me now, waiting. The entire room waited. And finally, I said the words Claire had been afraid to hear all night. I explained slowly that those messages had been created from the same device that had tried to break into my phone. Claire's breath caught instantly, and someone in the room whispered in shock. Ryan slowly turned toward his sister. His voice was quiet but heavy as he looked at her and asked, "Claire, what did you do?" For a moment, Claire didn't answer. She just stared at me. Then she suddenly laughed, a sharp, forced laugh. "Oh my God," she said. "You're actually trying to blame me now?" She looked around the room, clearly hoping someone would support her. "Listen to her," Claire continued loudly. She gets caught cheating and suddenly it's my fault. But no one laughed with her. The guests were silent, and Ryan was still staring at her, waiting. Claire shifted uncomfortably and tried again. Ryan, come on, she said. You know I would never do something like that. I stepped closer to the television. Then this should be easy to explain, I said calmly. Claire frowned. What are you talking about? I picked up the small remote beside the TV. Last week, after I got that security alert, I explained, I asked a friend to help me check where it came from. Claire's eyes widened for just a second. She tried to hide it, but I saw it. And, do you know what we found? I continued. Ryan slowly shook his head. What? I pressed a button on the remote. The screen changed. The fake messages disappeared, replaced by a different page on the television, a simple report with lines of information, dates, and login records. Then everyone in the room noticed one small line that made the entire space fall silent. Device location. Claire Mitchell's laptop. Claire's face went completely white. The room exploded with whispers as people leaned forward to read the screen. What? Did you see that? That says Claire's computer. Ryan looked at the television, then slowly turned toward his sister. Claire, his voice sounded completely different now. What is this? Claire shook her head quickly. This is fake, she said. She made it up, but her voice was shaking. I stayed calm. Actually, I said, that report was created by a digital security company. Claire swallowed hard. Ryan pointed at the screen again. Then, why does it say your laptop? Claire looked desperate now. I don't know. Maybe someone used my computer. The guests were staring at her, and Ryan looked like he didn't even recognize his own sister anymore. But I wasn't finished yet. I took another slow breath. Claire didn't just try to hack my accounts, I said quietly. Claire froze. She knew what was coming next. Ryan frowned slightly. What do you mean? I looked directly at Claire. Those fake messages were created 2 days after something else happened. Claire whispered under her breath. Stop. But I kept going. 2 days after I discovered money missing from the family business account. Ryan blinked in confusion. What? Claire's voice suddenly rose. That's not true. I pressed another button on the remote. The screen changed again. This time it showed bank statements, several transfers moving money out of the family business account. Each one was connected to the same name, Claire Mitchell. The room fell into stunned silence. Ryan stared at the screen like he couldn't breathe, while his mother covered her mouth in shock. Claire? She whispered. Claire looked around the room wildly. You don't understand, she shouted. But Ryan finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but heavy. How much? Claire didn't answer. Ryan's tone became harder. How much money did you take? Claire's shoulders began shaking. A few transfers, she said weakly. I spoke calmly. It was over $80,000. Gasps spread through the room. Ryan closed his eyes for a moment, then looked at his sister again. So you stole from the family business, he said slowly. And when Lena found out, you tried to destroy her marriage. Claire's face twisted with anger. I did it for you, she yelled. Ryan looked stunned. For me? Yes, Claire shouted. She was going to turn you against your own family. Ryan stared at her like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he slowly shook his head. No, he said quietly. You did this to yourself. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but no one defended her. No one supported her. The truth was now right there on the screen for everyone to see. For a long moment, the room remained completely silent. Finally, Ryan turned toward me. His expression had changed. The confusion was gone, replaced with regret. Lena, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I nodded softly. I know. Ryan looked back at the television one last time, then turned to his sister again. You need to leave, he said. Claire looked around the room desperately, but no one stopped her. Slowly, she picked up her purse and walked toward the door. When the door finally closed behind her, the entire atmosphere in the room felt different. The whispers were gone. The tension had disappeared. Ryan walked back to my side and gently took my hand. This time, he didn't let go. After a moment, one of our friends cleared his throat awkwardly and said, So, are we still cutting the cake? A few people laughed nervously. Ryan looked at me and asked quietly, Do you still want to celebrate? I smiled. Yes, I said. Because that night wasn't just our anniversary anymore. It was the night the truth finally came out, and the person who tried to destroy my life ended up exposing herself in front of everyone.